Hi, everybody. It's always great to be here. And yeah, this is kind of a little grounding thing for me on Wednesday night in the middle of the week, a nice recovery focused thing. I like it. So tonight, I'm going to talk a few minutes about healthy validation. I think this source of validation that is often troublesome for addicts, even in recovery. I find people struggling with this sometimes. And part of this, I think, is due to lifelong patterns of getting validation in somewhat unhealthy ways. And there's a pattern that we see developing with this. One is, for whatever reason, whether it's trauma or some identity that we are upset about, or for whatever reason, we need to kind of go inside and retreat from the world, hide a part of ourselves. And these are those core beliefs that we get that can really affect how we seek validation. Because what happens is that when we retreat, often due to trauma or some other factors in our childhood, we go inside and create this false self around us. And usually that false self is one that looks for validation for other things. It may be validation for kind of superficial or external things, the way we look. So I work with a lot of gay men who spend a lot of time in the gym, so they look good. People focus on income, on the car they drive, how their partner looks, the clothes they wear, all that stuff, so they can get validation from the outside. The problem with that strategy, of course, is that on the inside, we still know who we are and we still feel bad about ourselves, and all the praise in the world for all this external stuff that we carry around with us is kind of hollow from our point of view, because we know the real story. And so I think it's a pattern. It can be a lifelong pattern of seeking this validation in unhealthy ways. So we're looking for that, getting approval, and with that approval, we begin to equate that with acceptance. And I think the acceptance and being accepted, that sense of belonging, is something that every addict probably longs for and misses. And by the way, that's one of the huge gifts, I think, of recovery and 12-step programs, that for me, at least, the 12-step recovery rooms are the first place I ever felt like I belonged. And I can go from my home in the East Coast to the West Coast and walk into a meeting I've never been to, and I know that I belong. And so that's a really amazing kind of thing. But it leaks into all these areas of our life. Think about Facebook. How many of us, post something and watch and how many likes it gets? Does it get shared? What are the comments? And we kind of live for that attention. So I think in many ways our whole lifestyle with social media particularly is really geared toward that, seeking validation, and not necessarily the healthiest of ways. So after a life spent chasing it and fearing not getting it, it's very often hard for us to figure out how we can get it in healthy ways, and ways that aren't really appealing to that side of ourselves that we want to kind of leave behind a little bit. So I think there are several kind of, rules to follow. One is that self-validation, or taking care of ourselves in a healthy way, healthy validation, really means accepting us and our own experience, our internal experience, who we are, who we want to be, and what our behavior is. And one of the things we often talk about is seeking integrity, because so many of the men we treat come in with really feeling, once they connect with the trauma and pain they've caused people that they love, and that kind of goes numb in the addictive phase. Once they really connect with that, they really start to feel and really are afraid of, I think, not getting that healthy validation for who they really are on the inside. And we always emphasize to them that they're good people that did bad things, right? Because I think the first conclusion is that I'm a really bad person. And that's that sense of shame and flaw that we found doesn't have any kind of logical, healthy outcome. People just really kind of sink into that shame spiral that we try to keep people out of. So a couple of ways that we can get healthy validation, rules, I guess, to follow. One, I'd say, is that we don't rely on others to validate our existence or to define us. So I think, how many of us grew up trying to fit in? How many of us grew up in dysfunctional families that left us being real people pleasers? And by the way, the problem with being a people pleaser is that eventually, if we do it long enough, we kind of lose touch with what we need and what we want. And we're so tuned into other people's needs and wants that it's very hard to identify, well, what is it that I want? And I'll ask that to a client sometime. I'll pose that question. It's like, I don't know. It's really hard to define. So that's a process that people need to learn how to do. So really it's a self-discovery process that sort of lays the foundation for being able to get validation in healthy ways. There's a couple benefits from that. One is that we feel not only increasingly connected internally, yeah, we are connected to ourselves, we're conscious of who we are, our flaws, our strengths, our talents, our gifts, our shortcomings, all that becomes clearer and clearer. And as we have the experience of sharing that or talking about that in recovery, we realize that people generally accept what we say. They don't come, run screaming from the rooms. And almost paradoxically, by kind of being honest with ourselves and really not trying to get validation in unhealthy ways, but rather healthy ways, we actually get more connected to people. And that's true of anything. I think it's true of intimacy. If we can be more vulnerable and open and show our flaws, we're actually more relatable. And I think that actually aids intimacy. It's really hard to be attracted to someone who's perfect because there's nothing there. Perfection is just really probably an external false self anyway, but you get the idea that it really opens up the idea of being connected. The other thing is that as we start to accept ourselves, we become stronger and we're okay. Not only do we get to figure out what our wants and needs are, but we can start to own things about ourselves that we might not have been able to see before. The negative traits, places where we were really, mean or didn't do well by someone, where we can really get these traits and really accept them. And I think oftentimes part of the denial of that construct when we're in our active addiction is that we are blind to a bunch of stuff about ourselves. And the more we kind of learn how to be transparent and get connected to our inner selves, I think that really opens up the opportunity to see things about ourselves that we may not like, and therefore we can change. Once we're aware of them, we can start working on them. And by the way, if some of this principles sound familiar, a lot of the steps are basically guides in helping us do this, as they are in many of these processes. There's a natural kind of logic and beauty to the steps. So in addition to our shortcomings, we can start to recognize our strengths. And I think it's often an important part of healing and developing resilience to look at our talents, our gifts, our strengths, and really own them. And say, hey, this is my unique set of skills, and this is where I can maybe make a difference in the world with whatever that is. And we start to accept ourselves, and that allows us in turn, and you can see how this all builds one on the other, we can start to step out of our comfort zone. I think one of the traps of people who are caught up in that seeking of unhealthy validation based not on who they are, but kind of the trappings they put around them, is that it's very kind of terrifying to get out of that zone and to be real. And so I think once we're real in the first place, once we're transparent and aware and authentic, then I think it's easier for us to step out of our comfort zone and, I don't know, get out on that dance floor and make a fool of ourselves, or sing at karaoke if anybody does that sober, or whatever we want to do to step out of our comfort zone. I think it can really help. The other thing, and this is where the growth really starts to happen, we can start to gradually let go of those old survival mechanisms that didn't serve us at the time, but we kept them anyway. They certainly don't serve us now. So some of those things we might have picked up based on trauma or a dysfunctional family or a series of bad relationships or whatever the source of it was, we can start to let go. We can start to take the risk of trying something different. And I think one of the most thrilling things in my own recovery was being able to shed and let go of some of that stuff. It felt like, 2 tons of stuff that I was carrying around that I didn't need anymore. It never did help me, but I thought it did. And these, mechanisms and defense things and ideas about myself and ideas about other people, a lot of it just doesn't serve us well. And we can kind of step out of that and begin to relate to people in new and different ways. And as a result of that, I think we can start to make better choices. One of the things I always tell clients, not only do we recommend not getting in a relationship if you're not in one, for a period of time, but the people that they would choose on their 30th day are going to be different than the choices they make on their 90th day, and certainly different than the choices they make at a year. So I think people in early recovery especially are kind of works in progress, and I think it's important to defer those major choices till we have a better sense of who we are. And finally, and perhaps I think the biggest gift of seeking validation in healthy ways and being authentic and transparent is that acceptance that we are enough, that we don't have to try to be somebody else. We don't have to try to do this or that. I don't need another master's degree. I don't need a bigger house. I don't need a different car. I don't need endless, years of therapy. I've had enough years of therapy already. I am enough. And I think that's an amazing gift for me, at least. And I think when I see it in clients as they move into recovery, that sense of that they are enough is huge. So I think that's my 2 or 3 or 4 cents on healthy validation.
Thank you, David. Throughout this whole thing, I was reminded of something somebody said in one of my very first 12-step meetings, and it stuck with me. And they, in their share, they said, today, for the first time in a really, really long time, I feel comfortable in my own skin.
I love that. Yeah.
And everything you just said is like, oh my God, feeling comfortable in my own skin. And it stuck with me so much because I was so uncomfortable in my own skin. And I went for all the unhealthy validation, the superficial stuff, the money, the prestige, the car, the clothes, whatever, and nothing meaningful and nothing about feeling okay with who I really am and being able to be honest and vulnerable about me. And it was all out of fear of how you would react to me if I did that, which is kind of sad because, it kept me from getting the connection and validation that I desperately needed and craved. But if you can't be honest and vulnerable with people, you're never going to get it. It's that catch-22. I'm scared of it, but I have to do it
exactly
to get what I need. So yeah. Anyway, thank you. We've got questions coming in. This first one popped up in the chat feature. It was the first one to show up. So even though I usually go to Q&A first, I'm going to do the chat one first.
Okay.
Can I ever use Grindr in safety without risking my sobriety? Grindr, for those of you who don't know, is a hookup app for gay men.
Boy, yeah, this is a hot topic. So I could take all evening talking about this. When we get into addictive processes, not only is it the act itself, it's not the sexual acting out or the porn or the meth or the cocaine or the alcohol, it's all the stuff that goes with it. And we know now that there are rituals where we kind of psych ourselves up and this is brain stuff that actually start our brain salivating. It starts to anticipate the good stuff that's coming, all that burst of dopamine that we know is coming. And something like Grindr or Tinder or apps for gay or straight people, doesn't matter. They're part of our addictive ritual after a while. If I go on Grindr, usually I know what's coming. And by the way, even if I don't act out or hook up with somebody, I'm getting a little dopamine drip every time I look at a picture and fantasize about that person and think about them. And that's the fantasy. That's part of the addiction itself. So Grindr itself, I think, is part of the addiction. But in terms of leading to other things, I think, yeah, that association is so strong that I think it's very problematic. There's a lot of studies that have shown basically when people start to think about acting out, or certainly when they pull their phone out of their pocket, our brains start to light up almost like we've already acted out. And so I think it's really risky. Believe me, a lot of people have put a lot of effort into figuring out how can I do this safely. And I don't know if anybody that's really comes away saying, I've got the magic formula. It's a really, because it's so powerfully connected with the acting out itself, and it's, in a way, it is a source of dopamine in and of itself. Anyway, I think it's a really dangerous prospect. I would really encourage you to do what we do at Seeking Integrity with our clients, is to encourage them to get a dating plan. And that means, not jumping into hookups, which those apps tend to do, which really don't go anywhere. And basically hookups are safe, and you're not vulnerable, you're not emotionally vulnerable like you would be in a relationship where you've seen someone over time. A coffee date, and then maybe a dinner, then maybe another dinner, then a movie, and then maybe think about, moving forward in a more intimate way. But at least at that point, you have, you get to know the person. And perhaps that's the whole point, is that you don't want another person. And I think a lot of us, at Seeking Integrity, talk about sex addicts and chemsex addicts having intimacy disorders. We we have trouble with vulnerability and connection. And so in a way, hookups are great because you get the sex, but there's no, no muss, no fuss, but they're also very unsatisfying. I've had clients who had hookups with, thousands of people, and they were like the loneliest people on earth. And so I think it's really important to learn how to connect in other ways. I often joke because, when I was a younger person in the world out there, there were no apps. And so I often joke about having a class on cruising behaviors, or the old, winks or things like that. It's just, but it's interaction. It's how to talk to people. That's the key.
Yeah, I was going to say, now how do we meet people then? And yeah, we have to do it old school. Dr. Rob says that when hookup apps first came out, he and I were first starting to work together, and he said these are like crack for sex addicts. And I was like, oh my God, they are. And that's how we've always described them. Hookup apps are crack for sex addicts. The high of sex addiction is being in the bubble. Having an orgasm pops the bubble and sends us back into the real world. So the high occurs when we're leading up to sex, and that occurs on hookup apps and porn and webcams, and it's all about the anticipation. And but yeah, this is how people date in the modern world. But sex addicts, we kind of have to go old school. I'm totally agree with David on that. So
yeah,
sorry, put the grinder away. Next
and
one.
how many clients do I know, and probably you too, Scott, that have purged it? They get rid of it and they download it, and they purge it again and download it. Just constant.
The same pattern with porn: purge, download, purge, download. Yeah. Because it's not working for you.
Yeah.
But yet it's compulsive, and it's easy, and nobody will know. It's easy to justify it. So thank you for asking that question. It's a great question to be asked. In a past webinar, you both shared what you do daily to reinforce your sobriety, your morning and daily routine. Could you share that with us again? I feel like somebody's going to fact check us and make sure we say the same thing both times. We better get it right. I want to lose credibility.
I'm gonna pull the blinds here. Yeah, just real quickly what I do, and it's because I'm often too busy to do too much, but yeah, I found that even 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the evening can really be helpful. If I have time, I do more, but that basic 10 minutes in the morning for me is just a little quiet time to settle myself. I ground myself. I do a little reading. I do a little prayer and meditation. And for me, at that point, the meditation is just more listening. If I have time, I'll sit down and actually do a real meditation with breathing and inductions and that kind of stuff. But so that's my morning, just kind of centering myself. And in the evening, I do gratitude. I do a gratitude list. And I've been doing some reading about gratitude, and just rather than do the same thing over and over each time, it was recommended in a book I read that we do gratitude around different topics. So one day I might do gratitude around my work life. Another day I might do gratitude about my love of music, or some music that I heard that day that really moved me. Or another day might be my relationships. But just kind of keeps it interesting and going. But I think the gratitude piece is magical. And I just want to say, I do want to hear Scott's too, because I'm going to fact check him as soon as we're done. But in the morning and the evening, I think if you do it's just, for me, the consistency is the key. Because if I do it every day, it's a bookend of my day. And I can be at home, or in normal times if I'm traveling, I can be somewhere else, not in my own bed, but it doesn't matter. I'm always grounded, and my day starts the way it should. So, Scott, how about you?
My morning routine, first thing, often even before I roll out of bed, I do this in bed because the cats are playing and they don't want me to get up yet, so I just do it in bed. I prefer to do it in my little meditation chair in the bedroom, which is very comfortable. And by the way, there's no TV, there's no radio, there's no nothing in my bedroom. My bedroom is for sleeping and quiet time. And that's a whole other issue, but I know David feels the same way about that. Limit distractions in the bedroom. I do a combination of the third, seventh, and 11th step prayer. I'm not big on thee and thou and thine, so I kind of rewrote them in plain English and put them together. And I do that. Then I do a version of the Serenity Prayer, which I try to add something. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. If there's something that I'm struggling to accept, I say it out loud. Today, I cannot control this. The courage to change the things I can. If there's something I'm working on, like, a character defect, I name that character defect. This is what I'm working on today. This is what I'm working to change today. And the wisdom to know the difference. And then I do my gratitude list. Like David, I like to mix the gratitude list up. I don't do topics, but my rule is I do 10 things, a 10-item gratitude list. I say it out loud. I don't write it down. I say it out loud. It's better if you write it down, but I say it out loud. The only thing that is allowed to be on my gratitude list from day to day, and it's how I start my gratitude list every day, is I'm grateful to be sober. After that, I need 9 things on my list today that were not on the list yesterday. So it keeps me searching for things I really am grateful for in that moment. And that's pretty much the morning routine. It's like 10 minutes. My evening routine is, I don't do it every evening. If I'm feeling unsettled, and I know when I'm feeling unsettled, I'll do a 10 step. I'll do some quiet time, maybe some breath work. Which David taught me about, and I really like. It works for me. And if I need to make an amends and it's not too late, I'll do it. And but thankfully, it doesn't happen very often these days. But yeah, that's my routine. But I reach out to somebody every day who's in recovery, and not just the people I work with. That doesn't count. I try to get to meetings. I love going to in-person meetings and going out and having dinner afterward. We're obviously not doing that in Southern California right now, but I try to do something every day with somebody in recovery. And sometimes, when we're not in a pandemic, sometimes it's just going to lunch with a buddy who's in recovery, and we don't even go to a meeting that day. We just go to lunch, but it serves its purpose. I act it out every day. I do recovery every day.
Great.
Okay. I love this self-awareness in this next question. Dr. Fawcett, my wife brings up sobriety-related topics and a relationship all the time, every day, all day and night. I don't remember the last time she talked to me about anything else, and I have found that I have zero patience for it anymore, and I'm struggling to not be a complete asshole and react negatively. I love her. She is the love of my life, but I'm sick of being around her, and I'm doing massive damage to her and our relationship. This is actually something we hear versions of fairly often. So what can this individual do, David?
Yeah, this is a real issue, right? Because obviously you care about each other and the relationship, and this is a problem. I think there's a couple of things I'd suggest. One is to talk about putting some boundaries around that particular topic in the conversation. So sometimes this is focused more on problematic areas as opposed to recovery areas, but to really say, okay, well, we'll do this between 7 and 8 at night, or something like that, where there's a time set aside where it doesn't kind of bleed into the whole day and all your conversations. The other thing, and I recommend couples really do kind of a daily check-in anyway, but that might be something to bring up. I think to sort of say, I love you dearly. I'm afraid I'm being an asshole and I'm afraid of hurting our relationship. But I really feel that when we only talk about this and not about anything else, it makes me feel X, Y, Z. And so I think, I also encourage you to bring up other topics. You don't just wait for her to talk about something, but hopefully, but to bring that up. But I think to kind of put parameters around the conversation, to express your feelings about it, and to, in couples work, I often ask for some kind of a behavioral change request. What might you do? What would you like to see different? And I think to put that in really concrete terms. The other thing I would do, though, is really make sure you convey to her that recovery is really important to you as well, and that this is not a way of dismissing recovery, but it's a way of trying to move forward as you incorporate recovery into your life and her life. And so to really talk about it in those terms. But it's an issue for sure. But I think, I think we have to, and I think I know who this is, but it depends too on kind of where you're at in recovery. I think that the um, first 3 or 4 or 5 months, even, I would just defer as best you can. And after a point, though, the conversation needs to become more balanced. But the other thing, I guess, as a therapist, I would wonder what's going on with your wife? What's this interest issue? Is it out of fear? And so, and, we know that spouses often the main priority they have is seeking emotional safety, and so she may be um, kind of seeking safety for herself by constantly discussing recovery and checking in about your recovery and all of that. So I think, those are some ideas. I don't have a magic answer for you, but I think those are some ideas that may help you. Um, Scott, any thoughts on that for you?
Well, she probably wants a break from this too. So maybe the two of you could schedule like date night once a week,
Yeah.
where it's an actual date and you promise both of you not to discuss any heavy topics, let alone recovery or addiction or cheating. We're going to act like we're dating and we're trying to woo each other, and we're going to have fun and, do silly things, go to the carnival or go bowling or well, I guess we can't do any of that crap now, but do something that is fun go for a long bike ride or whatever. But, schedule some fun time in to go with the scheduled check-ins and recovery time, because you both probably need it. So.
Right. I think it's so important in recovery, early recovery especially, to lay down new memories, good memories, stuff you do together. That's kind of going to start to overwrite some of the bad stuff that had been so recently happening. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I am a straight male, married 34 years. I have been bi-curious since I was a teen. At age 54, I finally discovered that I really am attracted to sex with men. This quickly became obsessive. I discovered Adam for Adam. This is a hookup site for gay men, and acted out a lot even after discovery. I'm now sober from porn and extramarital activity for 5 months. I've had a CSAT-led disclosure. Good for you. It was last Wednesday, and it has been very difficult for my wife. One of her questions is, can I live without gay sex? I tell her I can. Am I naive? Very good, interesting question. David?
Yeah, and I just want to say kind of how much self-awareness there is in here. So that's really, it's important. So yeah, I think when we see kind of two things in this regard, one is where through a process of escalation, people get kind of interested in different novel kind of sexual attractions. And sometimes for heterosexual men, that can lead into occasional encounters with men or with transgender individuals or whatever. And that, I think, is more of an escalation from the disease process of the addiction. In this case, however, I look at longevity. How long have those desires been around? And in this case, you say it's been around a long time, and you're at that age, I think, where a lot of people have this discovery for themselves in terms of maybe a primary attraction, but they're already committed and in love with a woman they've married and often have children and families, and this is a very difficult spot. And it's a really difficult thing to answer. I assume that you have decided based on your question that you will forego that gay sex and stay in a relationship, monogamous relationship with her. I'm assuming. Are you naive? It's going to be difficult, and I'm sure you're aware of that, right? This is a natural interest that you have that is not going to go away. We know from arousal templates, those things stay there. So this will be something that attraction won't go away. And so it really comes down to you. Some couples negotiate, if you will, and realize or figure out they can make it work somehow. It sounds like that's not your choice, and that's fine. There's no right or wrong here. But I think it's going to be really important for you to work with someone. And I think you say you're working with a CSAT. So it's going to be really important to kind of monitor your impulses, your feelings, what's going on. And I think to be really transparent with your wife. What I don't want to see, what I wouldn't want to see, I'm sure you don't either, is to go through all this, have that disclosure. And I've worked with couples like this where, of course, what is the wife most concerned about? after all this, we lay a foundation, we start repairing our relationship, and then, he leaves me for a man. As that, because that orientation piece is something they or you really have no control of. And so I think it's a matter of setting boundaries, setting parameters, and doing it. And certainly a lot of couples do that, where that is recognized, but it's not acted upon. And I think that's not so unusual. People do it. Not that it's not difficult, but it's certainly one very viable option. But I think the only place I see naivety in there is underestimating the kind of work that you're gonna have to do to kind of stay on track, at least initially. I think to process this and talk about it. What I do know from experience with these kind of situations, I think the longer you go without actually acting upon it, the easier it's going to be. But that's generally speaking. But yeah, I think it's a struggle. It really is. And there's, as I say, there's no right or wrong. But I think we have to be really respectful of your wife's feelings and realistic about that element of your arousal template. And so if you guys can work with that, then I think you can move forward. But I'd sure stay close to a therapist for a while and talk about this as feelings.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's the normal situation with cheating with an extra layer to it. I mean, it's, if I'm a straight guy and I've been cheating with women, can I live without the intensity and the excitement and the validation, the unhealthy validation that I get from affairs? And this is the same thing. Can I live without that unhealthy validation? And then also, oh, by the way, I'm also attracted to men. And can I, am I more or less attracted? You got to do that whole evaluation thing. So it does add an extra layer of complication. But yeah, I think you're 100% on it. It's doable. It's just not easy, but it's doable.
Right. And I would also really focus on building intimacy with your wife, right? Because intimacy and sexuality is much more than just physical sex. And I think there's so much more that can go into it and be very rewarding for both of you. But it requires the connection and really working on those intimacy skills, that, I guess, erotic intelligence kind of stuff.
Okay, I'm a sex addict in recovery for 2 years, and I travel for a living. That's a tough one. I'm currently in a hotel near a place where I acted out. That's why it's tough. My wife is triggered every time I travel, and it's hard to tell her I'm not acting out today and for her to believe me. I understand her frustration. She is scared I'll do it again. I do write a plan on every trip, and even today I just checked in with her. What can I say to reassure her I'm sticking to working on my recovery? So what can he say to reassure his wife? Can he say anything to reassure his wife?
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if that's possible, right? Because I think a wife who's been through that experience is, of course, going to worry and wonder. And I think over time, again, that the more you display, authenticity and integrity and showing up where you say you're going to show up and all that, I think the more realistic it becomes that she's going to calm down a little bit. But I think it's a really triggering situation for both of you to have to do that travel. I understand that it's sometimes necessary, but I think it's going to be hard. You might talk to her about what she would want to make her feel better, at least besides stopping the travel, which it sounds like you have to do for work. So, what would she want? And I know I've had couples, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I've had people, do the phone locator thing where they can kind of see that and do a daily check-in or morning and night check-in or something. Just, it's reassuring. Is it foolproof? No, but it does help, I think. And beyond that, I'm not sure you can do anything to reassure her except be true to your word and do what you say you're going to do and show up when you say you're going to show up and follow through over time. I think that's the biggest kind of healing factor here, is that factor over time. Okay, Scott.
Thank you. I had a sponsee probably 5 or 6 years ago who was dealing with a situation like this with travel for work. And he finally had to, it was a gay couple, and he had to decide what's more important, my job this job that requires me to travel or my relationship with my husband. And ultimately, he found a new job because the travel was, and he was very triggered when he was traveling. It was hard for him to stay sober. He was, but he was finding it very difficult, and his husband was finding it hard to trust him. And he finally decided, you know what? I can live without the job. I can't live without my relationship. I'm going to make a change. I'm not suggesting you need to do that, but sometimes we have to make tough decisions in recovery. There are certain people that early in my recovery, I had to realize, nope, they're fun, but I can't be around them. It's just not going to work. And that was a tough decision. And, but yeah, travel's a tough one because we're out there, we're alone, we're bored, and we know where to act out.
Right.
That's rough. So I commend you for staying sober while you're doing this.
I had to travel a lot in early recovery, and I always made a point of looking up meetings in advance and even reaching out to people in advance if I could, and laid out a recovery plan, basically keep me busy with dinners with program people and meetings and that kind of stuff. So I wasn't sitting in a hotel room alone, thinking about getting in trouble.
Yeah, David, thank you so much for bringing that up. I live in a town where people travel to, usually by choice, not for work, but they often travel here 3 or 4 or 5 times a year. And I have friends who live 2,000 miles away. The minute they're in town, they pick up the phone and they call me and we schedule dinner and we schedule, oh, great. I'm friends with these people now because they've done exactly what David just suggested, which they went to meetings and they said, hey, I visit here a lot. If anybody wants to go to dinner after the meeting, please come find me. And they make friends that way, and they stay sober. I don't know if they do that to reassure their significant other that they're not drinking or using or acting out, but they do it to stay sober, and it works for them. So, yeah, great suggestion. I love this next question. Is there a healthy way to use in air quotes way to use mind-altering substances, especially for non-addicts? I read that Bill Wilson experimented with LSD and found value in terms of getting out of himself. I also understood that a lot of research is going on using hallucinogens and treating severe mental illness. Thoughts? I have lots of thoughts that David does too, but his might probably are different than mine.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. What I would say about this is that there's some work that shows that human beings are very inclined to crave an altered experience, and I think that's probably been around for thousands of years, and I think it's probably at some point kind of hardwired in us. The problem is, I think that once we are an addict, at least for me, I kind of lose the privilege of thinking about that. The closest I come to it, honestly, is meditation. And for me, meditation, the difference with meditation, by the way, it's hyper focused, right? I'm very clear-minded and present. In a way, I think that people try to strive to with certain psychoactive medications and drugs, but I think that's the closest I come to that. But I think once we cross the line, it's really hard to talk about that, and I think to indulge in that. It's just too dangerous, because that state of dissociation, kind of off floating somewhere, is probably my ideal state, from my pre-recovery self, right? But that piece that's still in there somewhere. I mean, part of me some days just wants to kind of float away, and so I don't want to take a chance on that. So I'm kind of a purist in that regard. As I say, meditation is the closest I get, or maybe breathwork's in that. But that said, there are some really interesting research studies being done on some of these drugs. We know about ketamine, for example, being used as an antidepressant of last resort very effectively in certain people. Ecstasy is now under a lot of research for its potential in PTSD. So yeah, I mean, this is really interesting work, but I think it's still young. And even if it were out and approved, and I'm not sure it would be the right treatment protocol for me. I'm too afraid of that personally and for my clients. but maybe I'm just old-fashioned. Scott, what do you
No,
think?
no, okay, no, we're not so different then. You know, the only, I mean, I think you'd mentioned the studies that have shown some positive results. I just want to add that they've also shown some really negative results. And I watched somebody a couple years ago go through a ketamine trial, and it was an abject disaster. Um, and I've read about people who've gone through the LSD trials, and it's been an abject disaster. So it's just a bad idea. You know, as far as I'm concerned, it's a bad idea. I'm not an expert. David knows a lot more about this stuff than I do, but.
And let me just say too, because as most people know, I do a lot of work with methamphetamine, and there are two treatments that are illegal in the United States, but they're very popular among certain people. One is ayahuasca, which is a native plant, a psychedelic plant in the Amazon. I live in South Florida. There's actually, I know of some illegal ayahuasca places here down in the Keys. That said, but people go and basically have a guided, 48-hour shaman guide on these trips. They get really sick. But I had a client who, before he was my client, he went and did that in Costa Rica, and he was totally psychotic and jumped out of a moving Jeep and had a head injury, and just, it was a disaster. The other one is Ibogaine, which is an African root that a lot of people are touting now as a cure for methamphetamine. There's a treatment center in the Bahamas for it. It's just a real dangerous, in my opinion. There's some research trials on that too, but I'm skeptical. I just want to mention it because people are often, I get asked about that a lot. People are really interested in that stuff. So
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Okay. Almost 3 years from discovery of my husband's 24-year porn addiction, an affair with my family member, and use of hookup sites. I moved out 9 months ago due to him not doing any recovery. He constantly accuses me of cheating on him. This is terribly triggering to me, and when I point it out, he says he is allowed to have those feelings now because of what he has done. He also accuses me of not caring because I moved out and many other things. I think it is blame shifting and abusive. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the picture you paint here is not very flattering there. I think that's a long time for porn addiction. Acting out with a family member is kind of a especially difficult. And I think probably an act of self-care was great. And moving out 9 months ago, I think is probably what you needed to do, especially if it's not showing any evidence of recovery. So I think what we see typically when people are in their addiction is this blaming, taking no responsibility, doing exactly what you're pointing out, shifting the blame, getting really suspicious, totally projecting, which means basically I have a desire or I'm doing something, but instead of really owning it myself, I just project it onto you. I assume you're doing it instead. And it's a way of, every sign that you point there really says that he's not engaged in any kind of recovery work, and that you did by far a really good thing for yourself to get out of there. And yeah, I think it does borderline on abusive at some point. So yes, I think, and I do hope besides moving out that you have support for yourself and that you're getting the help you need to keep you strong and keep you resilient for whatever comes next, because then that's problematic. Scott, you did.
Hi, my husband is about to start Seeking Integrity's 2-week program. Yay, we'll see him soon. He told me yesterday that he's not sure he wants to leave his addiction behind or leave his last affair behind. He says he thinks he is in love with the affair partner, but he also loves me. He loves us both. Is that possible? How can I continue in the relationship after this disclosure? I want to think he really doesn't love her because he barely knew her. His relationship was 3 years, but mainly texting, and they saw each other once every 1 to 2 months. But he keeps trying to contact her. She told him she won't accept a relationship with a married man. I'm sure he's told her he's going to divorce. My question is, where am I standing now? He accepted going to the intensive. Should I be hopeful about that? Is it normal for addicts to feel this confusion? He also said several times a day his mind changes between wanting to stay with me, going with her, being free of commitment so he can act out, etc., etc. Is this normal, or does he have some deeper problem? Great question.
Yeah, I'm sorry you're going through this.
Yes, absolutely.
I do hope he comes. I think he could benefit a lot from being with us. You know, I think this level of confusion and impulse and uh, different allegiances and things is not that unusual for somebody in their addiction. I mean, and you're right, he doesn't know these people really, but what he's addicted to is the fantasy of that person. It's not the real person, it's the idea of the person. And so I think, yeah, I mean, I think he could keep some fantasies going on in his head, but I think he's, and the ambivalence, you know, that's something also that we see a lot. You know, do I really want this or not? Or should I just say screw it and go for it? That happens quite a bit. I think it's important to recognize that is not terribly unusual. But what I think the benefit of treatment needs to be, and certainly could be for him, is real clarity on that. What we do a lot of is a thorough assessment, a lot of breaking through some of the denial systems and the reality, just some reality checks. And he really needs to take this kind of mixed bag of people he thinks he loves and what he wants to do in different directions, and sit down with people who are going to kind of look for discrepancies in that and see, you know, what's really going on here, and point out and really do some confrontational work with him, I think. And by the way, not just from therapists, but from his peers. The peers are where a lot of the healing really happens in treatment. So I hope he does come. I would not do anything right now except take care of yourself, because you don't know where he's going to land. He's a work in progress. And I think it's just going to be a while, but he certainly needs treatment. And by the way, the 2-week intensive is just the beginning. That's just really that's a jump start. And what he's going to need is ongoing therapy and work to kind of clarify this. But I think I would just be focusing on taking care of yourself right now, and in regard to the last thing, does he have another mental problem? You know, an addict who's in their full-blown disease looks a lot like somebody with a real severe mental illness. You know, very manic or depressed or mood swings or just crazy.
Narcissism, and yeah.
Narcissism, right. Paranoia sometimes. So, I mean, it all, yeah, I would just, that again, we just have to kind of get him into some recovery and see what it looks like. But I would just really focus on yourself, make sure he comes. If he's ambivalent, you know, it's not unusual for people to kind of back out at the last moment, and we hope he gets on the plane, and we hope we can meet him in Los Angeles and welcome him.
Yeah, you know, I'm so glad David brought up he's not in love with her, he's in love with the fantasy, because affairs are not real. If you're a guy on this webinar and you're cheating, you are not cheating with the real person. I'm sorry, you're just not. You don't take out the trash with her, you don't pay the bills with her when she's sick, and you don't hold her head when she's throwing up into the toilet. You know, she doesn't yell at you for leaving your dirty socks out. It's not a real relationship. It's a fantasy, and especially one that's mainly texting and they see each other once every 1 or 2 months. That's not reality. That's not a real person. I mean, not that she isn't a real person, but he's not in love with a real person. He's in love with a fantasy that's not real. So I'm saying this for the addicts, not for in a response to this question. I mean, really look at what you're doing, guys or women, if you're cheating. And I would also recommend, now this is an answer to the question, maybe picking up a copy of Dr. Rob's book, Out of the Doghouse. He talks about this whole process and how with longer term affairs, and three years is longer term, this is kind of common. The guy will waffle like this. And it doesn't mean he doesn't love you. And it just means he's unclear in his own mind, and he needs probably intensive treatment. So I'm glad he's hopefully on his way to seeking integrity. So, yeah. I have a question. How do you stop having a crush on someone? Oh, good luck with that. I'm sorry. I constantly think about my manager all the time at work, and it's distracting and anxiety provoking, and it hurts my performance and functioning at work. I also text this person in a way that is kind of flirty, at least that's my intent, when it doesn't completely look like it. I'm not sure if people can tell I really like him. How do I stop obsessing? Great question. There's a lot packed into that, David.
Yeah. So first of all, be careful. I'm not a lawyer, but in this age of Me Too, um, things like those texts can get you in a lot of trouble. And so just be alert to that. I mean, it's not a good thing to do, obviously. Um, so we were just talking about fantasy, right? And the attraction in the fantasy. This is all about fantasy. You have a crush on your imagination of who this person is and what it would be like. And what Scott just said about there's no risk in that. There's probably not much reality, if any. It's all fantasy. And when we are engaged, and this is true of our love and romance addicts too, when we're engaged in that fantasy, we're getting a little dopamine feed from that. And all day long, when you're imagining this or imagining that or sending a text, it's all I would say an active addiction, because you're getting that dopamine flow based on the fantasy and the distraction of it. So you're off in that kind of bubble. So I'd be really cautious about underestimating the impact on you. I think it's not just an innocent kind of crush. I think it could really, first of all, have complications for your job, but also I think it's a serious issue in that it's distracting you. You said it's affecting your job performance. If you look at some of the criteria of an addictive disorder, I mean, you're starting to meet some of those too, where it's interfering with your daily life and those sorts of things. So I'd be really cautious. How do you stop it? I'd kind of, I think you just kind of have to. I think you stop acting out certainly on it with the texting and the fantasies. And I would really try, if you haven't, a 12-step meeting like SLAA or one of those where you can talk about the situation. I guarantee there will be people there that can relate to that and might have some important advice for you on how to do that. But I think it's one of those things where if you just say, I'm not going to do it, don't do it, without engaging any outside help or assistance, meaning peers or a meeting or some kind of connection where you can talk about it, I think you're just gonna give into that. But if you have outside assistance with even a buddy you can call and an accountability partner, if you will, and start talking about this, I think that those tools really do start to help. Scott, what do you think?
I've been chewing ice, so I want you to hear me chewing ice. I'm so glad you asked this question, because the only way to kind of stop having a crush on someone, which as David points out, is a fantasy, is to reality check it. And that means you have to talk about it in here. This is a bad idea. This is your manager. Sending these texts could cause real problems for you. Not just with this job at future, blah, blah, blah. SLAA, give it a shot. Good program. Sorry. Is it normal for most sex addicts that are 6 months into recovery that they can only focus attention on their own recovery? Yes, that's my answer. He says that due to his ADHD and his need to do dailies and homework and faith-based work, he needs to do this and not be able to focus on relationship work. Okay, I disagree with that. His behaviors recently seems like he's working his recovery, but I am cross-border too. So we're at odds. David, thoughts?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, in early recovery especially, it does require a lot of commitment and time. And I think that's a major piece of contention sometimes with the partners who feel that there's a chance of having their spouse back and present in their lives physically and emotionally and in every way. And then all of a sudden they're going to meetings and calling all these other people and working their program. So I think that is something that happens. However, I think that can never be done to the exclusion of working on the relationship either. I mean, maybe initially, the first, I don't know, couple months, 90 days, probably does need to be focused on foundational things, establishing connections, getting meetings, getting routines, doing some initial step work, and really getting grounded in the program. But eventually, and quite soon, I think, we have to start working on some of the damage in our relationships. And it's true that a significant number of people do have ADHD, but that can be managed both behaviorally or with medication. And there's things to do here. I don't know. I think it's a matter of priorities, and at least bringing the relationship work into the discussion. I, it sounds, and again, I don't know this situation or the case, but it sounds a little bit like he's avoiding that work with busyness. So that might be something for you guys to have a talk about.
Yeah, before I got into recovery, I was an addict, but not in recovery at that point. Some of my friends were getting sober, and I found them really boring because there was only one topic of conversation after that, and it was their recovery. So it's really normal to be obsessive about recovery, especially early on, and it's kind of necessary for a lot of people to be obsessive about it early on. But I agree with David. Part of that work, if he's in a relationship with you, is relationship work. I mean, that's part of it, and he may want to avoid that part of it. So I understand why you're at cross purposes, and hopefully he'll come around. Do you think couples therapy would help, David?
Yeah, definitely. Couples therapy is a pretty important adjunct anyway in recovery, I think. Just it can get kind of therapist heavy with if both partners have a therapist and there's a couples as a third, but sometimes it's really useful and I think worth the time and effort to do that. But definitely here, what a couples therapist can do in really a few sessions initially is to kind of clarify the situation, give you some tools and tips, maybe some communication skills. So yeah, there's a lot that can be done. I think it's more of a skill-based thing and a clarifying thing. Yeah, so I think just outside guidance would be useful.
Yeah, let's take one more question. I know we're at our hour, but I'm going to pull this one actually out of the chat feature. This is from a sex addict who says, I never feel like I want an intimate relationship again. Is that something that can be a realistic goal? I'm a recovering single gay male meth addict, 3 months clean. I followed and strongly agree with the strategy of ending the use of porn, hookup sites, etc., etc. CMA recommends at least 1 year of clean time before jumping into a relationship. I'm summarizing, but this guy doesn't want a relationship again. Is that realistic for a recovering person?
I think to be in a relationship or not is a choice. There's no right and wrong with that in my mind. I think we can, there's a lot of options. And, as a gay man, I think speaking as a gay man, I think gay men in general have maybe more options relationship wise and ways of structuring their lives in that. But I think whatever you decide is fine. And what you decide today is echoing back to something I said earlier, may not be what you think in 6 months. So I think it's a matter of kind of being okay with you and seeing where you're at right now. I think sometimes I would just process a little bit why, what's going on here? Is it that it's too intense in an uncomfortable way? Vulnerability, intensity, all that stuff that goes with the relationship, and that feels pretty awkward and intense if have been using drugs to deal with all that stuff. So I just would certainly be with a therapist to check out why and what you're doing. But first of all, congratulations, 3 months clean from meth is like no small thing. So that's a huge deal. But I would just be patient with yourself, and that's fine for now. No pressure, I think, and you can always decide. But I would not. I'd be looking at your skills with relationships in terms of friends, other things, not necessarily intimate relationships. Just the key to recovery is connection, and that can be a connection with friends and peers and sometimes partners, but doesn't have to be. So I wouldn't stress over that at 3 months personally.
Yeah, nor would I. I picked that question because I think this is the only argument I've ever won with Dr. Rob. It was when I first started working with him, and he was badgering me about, why are you not in a relationship? Why you need to start dating? You need to put yourself out there. And I was like, I don't want to be in a relationship. And he actually came around and understood that there are some people in the world who don't want that primary relationship. I'm really okay having lots of friends. I'm very connected to people and I have emotional intimacy, but I don't want a partner living in my house or even that I have to see 3 nights a week, or I just don't want it. And So we had many conversations, and I actually swung him around that it's okay to not be in a relationship. But we get so
That's
much
rather
pressure.
huge. I like that.
I know winning an argument, Dr. Rob, is not easy. But I mean, we get huge pressure to always be in a relationship, whether we get it from family or friends or society or ourselves. And
Right.
some people just would rather.
And it's honestly, it's nobody's business. Yeah.
Yeah.
I find people are always too curious about why you're not in a relationship. It's like, it's nobody's business.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions today. Thank you all for being here. We had a lot of people tonight, which is cool. Keep coming back. Tell your friends. The more the merrier. We'll be back next week. Anything you want to say to take us out, David?
No, except please everybody take care. Watch that validation thing we spoke of, and work on having it from the inside out. Thanks.
Good night, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Scott.